the thing about AI is it's essentially a very, very powerful tool to optimize for whatever you decide you want to optimize for. Um, and so in the case of, and I think where we can have problems, and so I'll talk to the current state of AI rather than kind of the long term potential impacts of artificial general intelligence. But whenever you have one of these kind of narrow forms of AI, it becomes very, very good at optimizing for whatever you give it. And so when we have a system that is, perhaps there's other companies that are optimizing to make more revenue, or like directly make more revenue, or have people spend more time on their apps, then you can essentially, the AI will be very, very good. It'll be very, very good at taking all the information, all the possible data it can, at actually delivering on that. But what I'm very proud of at Carv is that we're actually using AI for something that we believe is directly beneficial. So we believe that by getting people to actually better at skiing, so firstly we use AI to measure skiing, and then we use it to get people better at skiing. We're actually adding a lot to people's lives and their experience of the sport.
Hello and welcome back to the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast. I'm your host, Meg Carney, and I'm an outdoor and environmental writer and author of the book, Outdoor Minimalist, Waste Less Hiking, Camping, and Backpacking. The Outdoor Minimalist Podcast has the goal to give listeners actionable ways to waste less hiking, camping, backpacking, and more during every step of their process. Your impact outdoors starts long before you hit the trail and goes beyond leave no trace ethics. You'll learn how to identify sustainable outdoor brands, how to ask hard questions regarding sustainability, and begin to shift and evolve your mindset to integrate minimalism into all of your outdoor pursuits. In episode 142 of the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast, I am excited to introduce the topic of artificial intelligence to the show. Technology plays a huge role in our daily lives, but also in shaping the outdoor industry and our experiences with the natural world. With the applications of AI on the rise, there are a lot of ways that it can be detrimental to the environment, as well as our interpretation of the world and art. I'll eventually do an episode on the environmental impacts and the long-term effects of AI and data centers, but for this episode, we wanted to take a little bit of a positive spin and look at some ways that AI can be used to optimize our time spent outdoors. To help explain all things AI and provide a little bit more of a positive outlook on the future of AI technology, I had the pleasure of sitting down and chatting with Jamie Grant. Jamie is the co-founder and CEO of Carv, the digital ski coach. He has a background in physics and a PhD in statistics. Jamie came late to skiing, starting when he was 18 years old. After falling in love with the sport, he has dedicated his career to developing Carv to help elevate technique and overall enjoyment of the sport. So thank you for joining me on the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast today, Jamie. I am excited to dive into a digital topic and introduce the idea of AI onto the show. So before we get into that was my dog. Before we get into that, I would love for you to kind of start out with your background in the outdoor industry and how you like to integrate outdoor recreation into your life.
Great. Yeah. First of all, it's brilliant to be here. So I actually grew up on the east coast of the UK. So we are quite a long way from mountains. It's very, very flat. But I always tried to get outside as much as possible as a kid. Lots of hikes and kind of the rolling countryside. But it was only really when I got to about 18 that I actually got to go to the Alps and got to see like proper mountains on ski trips. And, really since then, I kind of fell in love with the mountains and firstly with skiing, which I started skiing when I was at university. I was at Oxford University on like my first kind of ski trip. And then since then, I've kind of been coming back and back as much as possible. And then during the process of founding Carv, I ended up spending a lot of time obviously skiing. And so, now as part of my work, I'm skiing about 50, 60 days a year. So I'm very, very lucky to get a lot of time in the mountains skiing. And in the summer, I also try and hike as much as possible as well.
That's amazing. I love that you have so much time that you can spend outdoors. And so I am curious, your background is in physics and statistics. So how does that fit into skiing?
Yeah, well, really, it's it's really the basis of skiing. So if you think about what we're trying to do when we're skiing, we're basically flying down a mountain, and especially when we're carving skiing, which is where we kind of started the idea behind the concept of carve, um, was we're basically getting onto our edge and then playing with the centripetal force of leaning onto our skis, tilting our skis, and then bringing them round from left to right to left to right. So I actually came to skiing when I was about 18, and so I was just kind of actually undergraduate at Oxford. So my mind was like full of mechanics, equations, and quantum physics and mathematics. And as I kind of went through my skiing journey, I was slowly getting better at skiing, and then I actually started a PhD in financial economics, so which is a lot of statistics. And really that was kind of where the penny dropped in terms of like, oh, maybe there's potential to create a product that tries to understand what we're doing in skiing. So it takes like the physics of skiing and actually turns that into like a useful way of improving how we ski. And so it was really that kind of like, as I was skiing, I was basically like thinking about the physics of it. But then during my PhD, it was actually a chance to kind of think about like, oh, like just because I know how fast I'm going or I know the G forces, like how can I turn all of this like data into something useful that actually kind of churns out a useful piece of information. So, if you imagine when you're kind of studying for a PhD, you're trying to answer a hypothesis. So, my hypothesis, because I was doing finance, was like, does the rate of how much people spend on consumer products, does that change, does that affect the economy, or like how the economy is growing, and you try and test the hypothesis, and you invent and you create all these statistical methods to basically try and like test that hypothesis. And then as I was developing my idea for Carve, basically I started thinking about like, oh, actually, could we test the hypothesis of am I skiing well or am I skiing badly? In that very simple sense, like, what does it mean to ski well? What does it mean to ski badly? And so I started to kind of like tear apart the pieces of skiing, basically. Like, what is it when we ski? Like, what makes a skiing turn good? What makes a skiing turn bad? And I started to kind of think about these kind of different kind of physics principles that can create like a good or bad turn. So, to give you some examples, we measure edge angle, which is the angle that the ski gets to the to the piece. And basically by trying to like, when you ski better, imagine like someone really kind of ripping like Taylor Ligety, they're really kind of getting on their edges, and that's like a high edge angle. And so basically with these kind of like, so building up these concepts piece by piece. So this concept of edge angle, looking at the speed we turn, looking at the G force that we turn, looking at how the skis move together, I started to kind of build up this idea of like, oh, actually, like what is the difference between good and bad skiing? And so that was the kind of the initial kind of founding kind of ideas of Carve. And then I was very lucky to, because I was studying at Imperial College London by that stage, to meet my co-founder, and we started to develop the business into a wider business.
Wow, that's so interesting. It is always cool to hear about kind of the backstory or inner workings and how I guess science can play into how we perform in the outdoors. And so if we look at Carve now, obviously you've been around for a couple of years now. So how has it changed and grown? And that was a lot of information that you kind of threw out, which was all really valuable. But would you be able to explain what Carve is at a high level and then kind of looking at the progression of it over the years?
So Carve is a digital ski coach. And what we're trying to do with Carve is basically make your skiing more fun. So we're always kind of starting from the principle of what can we do to make your skiing to help you have more fun skiing. And we do that through getting you better at skiing, so improving your skiing technique. The system itself is a system that basically fits onto your ski boots to measure the motion as you're skiing. That data is then sent to your smartphone, where it's processed in real time to give you detailed analytics in the app. It's essentially a tips to improve. First of all, we give you a score for each run, so you can get the what we call a ski IQ. So a good ski IQ is 100, an amazing ski IQ is 150. If you're one of the top athletes in the world, you maybe get 170. And then we also give you a tip. So we give you what you need to do to improve your ski IQ. What's the one thing that you need to focus on to try and improve your ski IQ and basically improve your technique and have more fun skiing. That's what we call the free session experience. And then we also have a real-time experience with a few different modes, but essentially what real-time experience is trying to do is create a very, very accelerated learning experience. So one of the things when I was trying to learn to ski was I would ski with coaches and would be in a big group and they'd give me some feedback at the end of the run. But I was really kind of craving to know how I was doing as I was skiing. So one of the big ideas behind Carv was like, if you can actually get the information as you finish a turn, you can create a very, very powerful accelerated learning experience, which almost kind of gamifies turn by turn the experience of getting better. And so that's like the real-time component of Carv. So it's really those two kind of elements. One is getting feedback at the end of the run, always knowing what you should focus on to improve. And the second part is to have that real-time feedback, so creating this very, very accelerated, fun learning experience.
So how does Carve actually track this information then?
Yeah, so basically the system consists of these two motion sensors that you actually put onto your ski boots. And essentially what it is it's essentially a piece of electronics that measures three-axis motion. So we know the acceleration of each of your ski boots, the rotations, with it basically have a gyroscope that measures the speed of rotation. And then we also measure the direction. So we have a magnetometer that essentially measures which way your feet are pointing. And we have that for each of your feet. And we, with essentially two pieces of hardware. And then all of that data streams to your smartphone, where we combine it with the motion data of your phone, as well as the GPS data of your phone. So there's really kind of rich understanding of exactly where your feet are pointing, how your feet, your inside your boots are basically moving together with each other, which is a very important indicator of how well you're skiing. And we also know exactly where you are and how fast you're going. And so that's really the kind of the raw ingredients to create Carv. But once we had those raw ingredients, we then had to kind of understand like what is a good skier. So we worked with a whole bunch of ranges, like a whole range of skiers of different levels, and essentially strapped them with a system, got them skiing, and tried to look for characteristics of skiing turns that were very good at differentiating between what is a good and a bad skier. So I mentioned edge angle, that's very powerful. Edge similarity is another concept we look for, which is how the edges are actually moving together. And then we also have concepts such as whether your skis are actually parallel through the turn, whether one ski edges, and then how quickly your skis edge during the turn. So do you get onto the edge quickly, or do you kind of come onto it a bit late? So there's about 15 different metrics we look for. And so that was the kind of starting point. And then that with that data set, we basically then created a system that actually measures your essentially scores your technique. So we use a lot of machine learning and AI to do that. And that's where that ski IQ comes from. And so we basically look for, so when we design that ski IQ algorithm, we look for how good is that at labeling these known data sets. So how good is ski IQ at picking the best skier when you, in any kind of comparison between two skiers? And we run the machine learning models to basically get better and better at that. And then once we have that, our next problem is, how are we going to tell you what you need to focus on next? So whenever you're trying to improve at anything, there's always one direction that is the best direction for you. And that's based on what you're doing wrong, but also maybe your history of the last few days, where you are, what kind of runs you're doing, what level of confidence you have. And our job at Carv is to try and work that out, so use data to work that out. So obviously coaches are brilliant at this, but they have loads of extra cues that we don't get, but we have to try and do what we can to get you that tip. And so once we give that tip, then we can hopefully improve your skiing technique, and then we can see the leveling of your improvement. So that's kind of how we go from a bunch of raw data to a high level experience that tries to get you better at skiing and having more fun.
Yeah, that is fascinating. So there's a lot of different programming that kind of went into this behind the scenes. And you mentioned that you do use AI for components of the product design, or I don't know, can I call it product design? Is that standard in the tech industry? I don't know. But
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
okay. So how does AI fit into that?
Yeah, so AI is kind of used throughout the system. We would probably call it more machine learning, which is essentially where you get a machine to solve a problem. But AI in a high level sense is really any kind of instance where you take where you try and get a system, we basically try and get a computer to solve a problem. And with Carv, the problem we have is we're trying to work out how to get you better at skiing. So that's the problem. And we're basically applying AI. We're using a bunch of data to do that. There's a few different parts where we use it. So first of all, in the actual physical product design, so those things we put on the boots, when we try and understand what is the best shape for that product, we can use machine learning models, AI models to optimize, to test different scenarios out, to help us understand what is the most efficient product form factor we can have that will reduce the cost, reduce the environmental impact of the actual product. So that's a kind of a physical part of the product design that uses AI. But then really where the meat of the product is, where we use AI, is essentially understanding skiing technique. So our big problem is, we have all this data and we need to basically develop a model that tries to understand when there's loads of different things that could be happening that could cause these movements in the senses, how that relates to your skiing technique. And to do that, we basically have to build what we think of as a foundational model of skiing. And so we take all of the data from our current customers and we basically train a model to try and understand what skiing looks like. And that essentially is an optimization problem we have to kind of run through and basically teach a system to understand how people are skiing. So that uses a lot of AI just to get that ski IQ number, that score we have to do. And then the second part where we use AI is basically the second problem so the first problem we're trying to solve is how good you are at skiing. And that's using an AI model of your skiing essentially, of all skiing, and then we apply that to your skiing. And then the second problem is like, where is that point that you need to improve? And so to do that, we basically have this insane data set. So we have about 600 million ski turns overall of our customers. And then we have about 150 million pieces of feedback that we've given customers. And if you imagine every time we give a piece of feedback, we can see if that feedback had a positive or negative impact on that person skiing. So if I said, look, lean. So if the system said lean forward, maybe you didn't move forward. If the system said, imagine squashing a grape on your shin, then actually it might have actually created an unlock for you. And so we have this huge data set of tips that we've given people, and we know the history, so we know the skiing history of those people, and so we can start to identify, or the system can start to identify where a tip will be the best possible application. And so it's very much like how Instagram will be very good at serving you the thing that's going to keep you interested in spending a bit more time on the app. Like their goal is to get you spending as much time on their app. Our goal is to get you better at skiing. And so we do that by serving you the best skiing tip. And so we also use AI to optimize that feedback loop. And so it's those 2 points. And as we get more and more data into the system, so more and more skiing turns and more feedback events, the amount of data that the AI has to actually go through becomes exponentially large. And so obviously that means we spend a lot of time actually training up the model.
That's very complex. AI is kind of hard, I think, for average consumers to kind of conceptualize and understand. And I think a lot of things that we see in media especially can be kind of like fear-mongering, which there are concerns that are valid when it comes to AI. And so your application of AI is interesting to me because it is kind of fostering a deeper connection with an outdoor sport and an activity, like a way for you to kind of enjoy it more, improve your performance, and it isn't necessarily taking away from your experience. So was that kind of your intention with the application of AI, or how do you think AI can be used to foster a deeper connection?
Yeah, I think the thing about AI is it's essentially a very, very powerful tool to optimize for whatever you decide you want to optimize for. And so in the case of, and I think where we can have problems, and so I'll talk to the current state of AI rather than kind of the long-term potential impacts of artificial general intelligence. But whenever you have one of these kind of narrow forms of AI, it becomes very, very good at optimizing for whatever you give it. And so when we have a system that is, perhaps there's other companies that are optimizing to make more revenue, or like directly make more revenue, or have people spend more time on their apps, then you can essentially, the AI will be very, very good. It'll be very, very good at taking all the information, all the possible data it can, at actually delivering on that. But what I'm very proud of at Carv is that we're actually using AI for something that we believe is directly beneficial. So we believe that by getting people to actually better at skiing, so firstly we use AI to measure skiing, and then we use it to get people better at skiing. We're actually adding a lot to people's lives and their experience of the sport. And so I think we're very lucky to be in that circumstance where our goal is actually very aligned with, I think, what most people will come to our product for. So that, when people have I think when you get that misalignment, then you can get something, you spend 5 hours just messing about on an app, looking, like, doom scrolling, and you're like, oh my God, this isn't adding to my life. And that's because the incentives of that business aren't necessarily aligned with your goals. And so with us, we're very lucky to be in a situation where obviously people have to pay for a product. We don't give it away for free, but then once they're paying, once they're one of our members, our objective is to get them better at skiing and to have more fun doing it. And then we can use AI to basically accelerate that objective.
Adventuring plans on your calendar? Remember to grab your Lava Linens travel towel on your way out the door. Founded by a mother-daughter team, Lava Linens crafts durable, luxurious travel towels as a more sustainable and better performing alternative to microfiber and cotton towels. Powered by flax, hemp, and tencel, they're designed to be by your side for years to come. Use the code OutdoorMinimalist for 15% off your next order. As a consumer, I think a lot of people are using technology in their daily lives. It's hard to escape. And as a tech company, how do you balance the hidden environmental impact of these technologies? Because I think it's a consideration most people aren't making, or not people in the tech industry, but like consumers I'm talking about, because it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. Like, we have this product, like a final product, and we may consider it when it reaches the end of life. But what about while we're using it, or while it's being created, and the traditional planned obsolescence built into a lot of electronics?
Yeah, I think I think it's one of the biggest challenges of our time. I think reducing the environmental impact is an essential challenge for all industries, and as a human race, we need to get to net zero emissions as fast as possible. When it comes to the way people think about products, I think you're right in that I think it's very easy for people to look at one part of a supply chain and perhaps focus on that, whereas not thinking about the whole product. So, when we think about things, we think, first of all, what is it we're actually sourcing? What are the materials that we're putting into the products? How do we assemble those materials to make the products? Then how do we ship the products? Then how are any kind of usages of the people when they're actually using the product? How does that impact the environment? And then ultimately, when we train our models, the AI models we talked about, that also has an impact. So I think it is certainly. I think it's important that companies try and understand where the issues are where they're lying, rather than just kind of focusing on one or the other. I'm happy to talk about how we go, how we approach that.
Yeah,
But
it would be
I think,
great.
yeah.
That would be great to hear about how you as a company have handled those questions, and how do you grapple with the impact that Carv is having, not only in a technological space, but in the environment and long-term vision.
Yeah, so I think, at Carv, we do a lot to try and limit the amount of CO2 we emit. But I'll certainly say that there's more we can do, and we're doing it all the time. And we're certainly no poster child. There's many things I'd like to do better. I think the difficult thing with any business is that obviously you want to minimize the impact that you're having on the environment whilst also maintaining a profitable business, because if you don't, then you can't reach your original objectives of helping people, in our case, to ski better. On our side, we've done a few things to improve our environmental impact. So one of the things we've done is to move from air freight to sea freight, which has a huge impact. So it reduces the impacts of the shipping of our products by about 50 times. The second one is the great thing is that that's actually beneficial as well. So when we think about that profit and being careful of the environment, that actually helps us in both respects. And then there's a lot of other things we can do that are relatively cost neutral, that have also helped us minimize our impact on the environment. So, for instance, we've moved to having, so we've always had recyclable packaging, even from the beginning. Essentially, when you look at it, there isn't that much difference between the cost of having cardboard packaging that's recyclable and perhaps having some kind of plastic packaging. And so we always make that deliberate choice to minimize our impact in that respect. And then when actually selecting who manufactures the products, we use manufacturers that actually offset their CO2. So when Carv is assembled, the factory itself is using systems that avoid or at least have carbon offsetting to make sure that we're not having an impact. The third thing we do is the fourth thing we do is whenever anyone so in Carv, you can refer friends, and when you refer a friend, you can there's some perks you can get, and one of the perks is actually to donate to Protect Our Winters, so that also helps as well. So there's a few things that we're doing to try and help, but there's obviously always more we can do. It's interesting looking at AI. So for us, our models, although are relatively sophisticated, we're actually looking at quite a significant amount of data. They're probably quite a lot smaller than the models of they're certainly a lot smaller than the models of OpenAI or Microsoft when they're training on all of the human language. Although we train on a lot of skiing data, it's not the same as the sum of all the human language that's been written. And however, when we do train our models, we've basically partnered with suppliers that. So the thing about training models is it can be very energy intensive. So basically, you basically a lot of compute power, which takes a lot of energy to actually power the computers essentially, and that energy has to come from somewhere. So we've partnered with a supplier that actually has carbon neutral. So and they offset the energy of the carbon used to train our models. So there's certainly more we can do, but with those things, we feel that we're stepping in the right direction. And as we get bigger, we can have a bigger impact.
Yeah, it sounds like there will always be something to kind of improve or work on. That's kind of the standard, I think, for a lot of different industries, is a lot of people are learning as they go. And it's good to kind of like recognize that areas of improvements and like where they can happen. And I think for me, as you were talking, I am just kind of curious, like as far as the data goes. So are these types of technologies, they're stored in like offsite data centers? So when you're talking about a supplier, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. So we essentially partner with one of the large suppliers, and they have a big data center in Frankfurt, and that's where we keep our data. And that's where we do a lot of our processing as well. So we do sort of day-to-day processing just on our laptops, which doesn't use too much energy because you're just processing on a small kind of overall part of the overall data set. But when you want to do large processing, training of a large model, then you actually have to do that on an external supplier, and that's what we use.
Interesting. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of data centers, so I'm going
Yeah.
to veer away from that because I feel like it's a whole other thing, and you're not necessarily like running the data center, so I won't ask you too much about that. If you've enjoyed listening to this interview and any of our other interviews on the Outdoor Minimalist podcast, we'd love to hear from you. One super easy and free way to support our content is by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. We thank you for listening to and supporting our work so that together we can create a better outdoor space as we recreate. Okay, so now if we're kind of zooming out into the broader outdoor industry, and I guess you could talk more to like snow sports industry since that's your main focus, but how do you think AI technology can be applied to more areas of the industry in a responsible way?
Mm. So I think the big thing about AI technology is that especially when looking at the snow sports industry, is there's actually a lot of opportunities to help us as an industry reduce the impact we're having. So I think, a lot of people are thinking, okay, if we start using a lot of AI, we'll obviously start using a lot of energy, and that energy will actually potentially cause the emission of more carbon, actually contribute to climate change. But there's a lot of choices that we're making that, if we can actually use AI in a sensible way, can actually start to reduce the impact we have on the environment. So one kind of instance from our side is we've done a huge kind of AI analysis, trying to optimize the way that we use the products to actually reduce the overall size of the product, which actually, so we can have a reduced form factor. It's easier for people to put on their boot, and it means that we can actually improve the performance for the customers, but actually reduce the impact on the environment. Because if you imagine, if you can make the product about half the size, then you actually kind of mean that you need half the materials, the weight is half, so the cost or the impact of shipping is half. So this is an example of, by using AI, you can actually start to reduce the overall impact you're having on industries, on the amount that you emit to the environment. And I think where people can get really smart is especially these cases where you can actually use AI to help you reduce costs in a way that actually reduces your impact. So, for instance, perhaps if you're running a ski resort, you can start to use AI to think like, oh, where's the best place to run the groomers tonight? Because we know that the way that the snow fell, and we know that where people have skied, actually, maybe we don't need to run this part, we don't need to groom this part, or this part needs extra grooming. But because obviously their intention is to perhaps reduce the amount the groomers are spending on the slopes, and that would also reduce the amount of carbon emitted for the groomers to go up and down. There's lots of kind of like optimization opportunities basically we have throughout our industry. So I think when people get smart about the application of these technologies, we can actually start to reduce our overall impacts. For us at Carv, it's a lot about reducing the size of the product and basically streamlining it. So because then that reduces our supply chain. But then for other companies, it might be better shipping of your products. That's when people need it. Perhaps they can direct people in such a way where they have like a lower carbon impact in terms of which kind of ski resort they go to. Say you have multiple resorts and you're trying to like optimize the allocation of people who are going to the different resorts, and they're driving, so you can reduce the amount of driving they're doing.
Yeah, those are some interesting examples. It'll be neat to see how the industry starts to apply this over the next couple of years, especially as AI I guess matures and develops, and there's new applications here and there. So those are most of the questions I have. Before you share how people can learn about Carve, are there any other things you'd like to add?
Um, from my side, that's really everything. I think, yeah, it's fascinating to talk about, to think about the not just the challenges that AI can actually have, and the impact, the negative impact it has, but I think there's so much positive impacts we can have if we try and apply AI in a way that will actually reduce the um, costs and emissions within our industry.
Absolutely. So, how can listeners learn more about your technology and check out Carve for themselves?
Yes, so you can find everything you need to know about Carv at getcarv.com. And we've got everything about the products. We've also got a newsletter you can sign up to. So when you're on the page, you'll get prompted to sign up. So I suggest you sign up to that and can hear all the exciting updates we have in the next few months.
I'll be sure to share all of that information in the show notes as well, so it's easy to find. But with that, Jamie, thank you so much for taking the time to explain the complex topic of AI.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening. And if you like what you hear, let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book, on YouTube, or subscribe to our weekly newsletter at theoutdoorminimalist.com. For even more updates, other educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with the shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.